She fell asleep in this most dangerous bed in Chicago, and the man who has ordered a dozen deaths chose to let her sleep. If you've ever done something desperate just to keep someone you love alive, stay until the very end of this story. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The fever hit her somewhere between the third-floor hallway and the door she was never supposed to open. Chloe Bennett had been awake for 31 hours. She knew that number the way people know their own heartbeat, not because she counted, but because her body had stopped letting her forget. The ache had moved past muscle by then. It lived in her bones now, in the thin place behind her eyes where thought and pain had started to blur into the same dull frequency. She'd worked the overnight shift at the diner on Ashland until 4 in the morning, 9 hours on her feet, coffee-stained apron, tips that barely covered the bus fare home. Then she'd slept 2 hours on the couch because Tommy had needed help to the bathroom at 6, and she'd never gotten back down once she was up. After that came the 40-minute ride on 2 buses to the North Shore, a neighborhood that didn't want people like her arriving through the front gate. She came in through the side entrance, the way Mr. Caruso's assistant had explained during the brief, clipped orientation 3 days ago. Staff used the side entrance. Staff did not speak unless spoken to. Staff absolutely did not enter the private suite on the 4th floor under any circumstances. Chloe had nodded at all of it. She needed this job. The hourly rate was more than she made in a full shift at the diner. The estate itself, she'd heard the other housekeeper, a quiet Polish woman named Agata, call it simply the house, the way you'd call a cathedral simply a building, was 7,000 square feet of marble floors, high ceilings, and a particular kind of silence that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Like the whole place was waiting for something bad to happen and had gotten very good at being still in the meantime. Victor Russo's house. She hadn't known it was his until after she'd taken the job. By the time she found out, she was already counting on the money. She'd heard his name before, the way everyone in certain parts of Chicago had heard his name, attached to things you didn't ask follow-up questions about. A warehouse fire on the south side that killed 2 men affiliated with the Donati outfit. A city alderman who reversed a zoning decision overnight and never publicly explained why. A federal case that had 17 witnesses and collapsed with 11 of them. Victor Russo's name floated above all of it like smoke, never quite settling, never quite dispersing. Nobody who had said it out loud in the wrong company had said it twice. And now she was cleaning his house. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she wasn't there to know anything, see anything, or understand anything. She was there to wipe down surfaces and empty trash bins and collect the check. That was the whole of it. But by the time she reached the 4th floor landing, the fever had climbed past the point where she could make good decisions. She'd been running hot since morning. She knew that too. She'd swallowed 2 ibuprofen at 5 a.m. and 2 more at noon and told herself it was just exhaustion manifesting as heat, the way bodies sometimes protested overuse. She was 24 years old. She was strong enough. She had always been strong enough because there had never been the option of being anything else. The 4th floor hallway stretched ahead of her, long and dim, the kind of corridor that existed to impress people before they reached whatever room waited at the end of it. The cleaning cart felt heavier than it had 3 hours ago. Her vision had developed a faint shimmer at the edges. Not quite double, not quite blurred, but wrong in a way that made her grip the cart handle tighter. She was supposed to clean the sitting room adjacent to the private suite. Just the sitting room. The door to the suite itself would be locked, Agatha had told her, and even if it weren't, she should treat it as if it were. That door did not get open, not by staff, not by anyone who valued their continued employment, or, Agatha had added with the particular flatness of someone relaying a fact rather than an opinion, anything else. Chloe had understood. The sitting room was fine. She moved through it on automatics. Dust surfaces, vacuum, empty the small bin beside the armchair, straighten the 2 books on the side table without reading their spines. 15 minutes of work that felt like an hour. The room had a fireplace that hadn't been used recently, and a window that looked out over the back lawn, and for a moment she stood at that window and let the late afternoon light hit her face and tried to remember the last time she had simply stood still. She couldn't. The door to the private suite was not locked. She noticed it on her way back to the cart. The door had been pulled nearly shut but hadn't caught. And when the heating system kicked on somewhere below and sent a breath of warm air up through the vents, the door drifted inward 2 inches. Just 2 inches. Enough for her to see a slice of the room beyond. Dark wood, low light, the edge of what appeared to be an enormous bed with charcoal gray sheets. She should have left. She knew she should have left. What she told herself later, when she had the chance to reconstruct the sequence of events with a clearer head, was that she'd been going to close it, that she'd been moving toward the door specifically to pull it shut, because leaving a door open in this house felt like leaving a loaded weapon on a countertop. She'd been doing the responsible thing. Whether that was true, she couldn't be fully certain. What was certain was that she pushed the door open instead of pulling it shut, and then she was standing inside Victor Russo's private suite, and the cool darkness of the room came around her like water, and the bed, Christ, the bed, was right there, 6 feet of it, maybe more. Made up with the kind of precision that suggested a person who did not tolerate disorder, the sheets pulled drum-tight across a surface that looked like it could hold 3 people without any of them touching. The fever spiked. She felt it the way you feel a wave hit you from behind. Sudden, total, reorganizing. Her knees went soft. The room tipped slightly. She put one hand on the nearest surface, which turned out to be the footboard of the bed, cool and solid and real beneath her palm, and she stood there for a moment just breathing, just trying to find the floor again. She sat on the edge of the bed to rest for a moment. That's all it was going to be. A moment. She was asleep in less than 40 seconds. Victor Russo drove himself when he didn't want anyone to know where he'd been. Tonight, he'd driven himself. The meeting had been in Cicero, in the back room of a restaurant that legally belonged to a cousin of his underboss, but functionally belonged to no one, in the sense that everyone who used it for private conversations agreed to pretend it didn't exist afterward. What had been discussed in that room wouldn't be discussed again, except in the specific and carefully managed ways it would need to be. Victor had said maybe 30 words in 2 hours. He'd listened to a great deal more than that, and what he'd listened to had left him in a particular kind of mood that he recognized and didn't bother naming. He was 51 years old. He'd been in this business in one form or another since he was 19, starting as an enforcer's driver and moving upward through a combination of intelligence, patience, and a willingness to do what needed doing in moments when other men discovered they were, at the critical instant, unwilling. He'd built the Russo organization from a mid-tier operation with debt problems and a weakened reputation into the dominant force in Chicago's organized crime landscape through the same qualities. And he'd maintained that position for 11 years by refusing to let sentiment cloud the mathematics of power. He had no illusions about what he was. He'd stopped having illusions somewhere in his late 30s, around the same time he stopped sleeping well and started keeping a gun in every room of his house. What he had instead of illusions was precision. He knew what he controlled and what he didn't, what could be trusted and what only appeared trustworthy, where the edges of his influence lay and how much force would be required to push them further. This knowledge was not comforting. It was simply accurate. He parked in the private garage, dismissed the 2 men who appeared at the garage entrance, and took the private elevator to the 4th floor. The suite was where he went when he needed to not be observed. Not because he was performing anything in the rest of the house. He didn't perform. But because the suite was the only space in 7,000 square feet that didn't belong to the organization. It belonged to him. The distinction mattered in ways he'd never explained to anyone and wouldn't have bothered explaining even if asked. He opened the door. The first thing he registered was the cleaning cart parked against the sitting room wall, which was wrong because the 4th floor wasn't scheduled for staff access today. The second thing he registered was the woman asleep in his bed. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. She was on top of the covers, still in her uniform, a black shirt and dark pants, practical flat shoes still on her feet, curled slightly onto her side with one arm tucked under her cheek. She was young, 20-something maybe. Her hair had come loose from whatever she'd pinned it into and fallen across her face, and she hadn't stirred at the sound of the door because she was deeply, utterly unconscious in the way that people are when their bodies have simply taken the decision away from them. Victor stood there and looked at her. His hand moved once toward the phone in his jacket pocket, an automatic motion, the reach for his head of security. He stopped it. He crossed to the bed and stood close enough to look at her properly. Her face was flushed, not the flush of someone sleeping warmly. The flush of fever, a deeper color, concentrated at the cheeks and the bridge of the nose. Her breathing was slightly too fast and slightly too shallow. Her brow was creased even in sleep, the expression of someone whose body was working hard at something that wasn't rest. He reached out and placed the back of 2 fingers against her forehead. The heat was significant. He stood there in the dark of his own suite, 2 fingers resting lightly against the forehead of a woman he'd never met, and he didn't move for a full minute. Then he went to the other side of the bed, removed his jacket and his shoes, and lay down on top of the covers with his back to her and his eyes open and waited for morning. He was awake before she was. He'd slept maybe 2 hours, which was about average. He'd lain in the dark and listened to her breathe and thought about the meeting in Cicero and the thing that had been said in that room that he wasn't going to say aloud yet. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, he drifted into the light, watchful sleep that was the closest he usually got. When gray light began coming through the gap in the curtains, he got up, put his jacket back on, and stood at the window with a glass of water and watched the lawn below emerge from the dark. She woke at 6:17. He knew because he heard it. The specific quality of silence in the room changed when she came back to consciousness. The breathing pattern shifted, and then there was a small sound that might have been a gasp, and he turned to look. She was sitting up. She'd gone the color of chalk. Her eyes were on him, and they were enormous, and she had both hands flat on the mattress beside her, like she was about to push herself backward through the headboard. He said nothing. She said, "I'm," and then stopped, and then tried again. I wasn't supposed to be in here." "No," he said. "I'm going to—" She started to get up, and he watched her sway and catch herself on the bedpost, and the fever was still there, visible in her face, the flush redistributed by sleep, but not reduced. "Sit down," he said. She didn't sit down. She stood with her hand on the bedpost and looked at him with the eyes of someone calculating. He recognized the look. He'd seen it across tables and in interrogation rooms, and in moments just before violence, that specific quality of attention that meant someone was very rapidly trying to determine how bad their situation was. "I fell asleep," she said. "I was cleaning the sitting room and the door was open and I sat down for just a second. I didn't mean to—" "I know." She stopped. "What's your name?" he said. A pause, like she was deciding whether to give it. "Chloe Bennett." "How long have you been sick, Chloe Bennett?" Another pause. Shorter. "Since yesterday morning." "You came to work with a fever." She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, then he went to the door and opened it and called down the hall for Marta, who ran the household staff and appeared within 2 minutes because Marta had learned years ago that appearing within 2 minutes was the safest response to being called. "Get her something to eat," he said, "and something for fever." He looked back at Chloe. "She stays in the East guest room today. Off her feet." Marta didn't blink. "Yes, Mr. Russo," Chloe said from behind him. "I can't do that." He turned back. She was still holding the bedpost and still had the chalk color, but her voice had steadied into something flat and certain, and that caught his attention in a way that the situation hadn't quite yet. "I need to finish the floor," she said. "I need to do my work. If I don't finish, I don't get—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I can't miss work." He studied her. "You'll be paid for today," he said. She looked at him like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Then something moved across her face that she controlled quickly, pulling it back into neutral before it could become readable. But he'd caught it. Not gratitude. Not quite. More like the specific bewilderment of someone who had been operating under a set of rules about how the world worked and had just encountered data that didn't fit the model. "Okay," she said. The word cost her something to say flat like that, without qualification. He could see that. "Can you walk without falling?" he said. "Yes." "Then follow Marta." He did not think about her for the rest of the morning. That was what he told himself. He had a call at 9 with his accountant regarding 3 shell companies that were being restructured. And at 11 there was a conversation with his underboss, Marco Vitali, about the situation in Cicero that needed to happen in the specific coded shorthand they'd developed over 14 years of working together. He ate lunch alone in the study, standing at the window, which was how he usually ate when he didn't have a reason to sit. At 2 in the afternoon, he asked Marta how the girl was. Marta said she was sleeping, said her fever had broken around noon, said she'd eaten half a bowl of soup and asked 3 times whether she should be getting back to work. Victor said to tell her she shouldn't. He thought about the way she'd said, "I can't miss work." The flatness of it. Not a complaint, not a performance of hardship, just a fact, stated with the particular economy of someone who had learned that elaborating on hard things didn't make them easier. He recognized that economy. He'd grown up in it, a long time ago, before other things had replaced it. She left at 4, on her own feet. Color mostly returned to her face, the fever down to something low and manageable. He wasn't there when she left. He was on the phone in the study. But Marta told him, and he said nothing, and that was that. 3 days later, she came back for her next scheduled shift. He saw her from the window of the second-floor landing as she came through the side entrance, the cleaning cart already loaded, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to get through tasks quickly because tasks were always piling up behind them. She didn't look up at the windows. She didn't look around the estate. She came in, she went to work, and she was invisible in the way that people are invisible when they have decided their visibility is not the point. He found himself watching for approximately 90 seconds before he recognized what he was doing and stopped. The first time they spoke after that was 2 weeks later, and it happened because she dropped a glass. She was cleaning the main floor study, a room he occasionally worked in during the day, one that was not, technically, off limits during daytime hours when she came through with the cart. And she was moving around the large oak desk to reach the window ledge behind it, when her elbow caught the edge of a glass he'd left there the night before. The glass came off the edge and she caught it. Not with both hands, with one, a fast sideways snatch that stopped at about 8 inches from the marble floor, and she straightened up holding it and looked at it, and then looked at him because he was sitting at the desk and had just watched all of this happen. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. She set the glass back on the desk edge, then apparently reconsidered and moved it to the center of the surface where it wouldn't be close to anything. Practical. She went back to the window ledge. He watched her work for a moment. There was something economical about how she moved. No wasted motion. The cloth went across the ledge in 3 efficient strokes. She checked it once, moved to the next surface. She wasn't performing carefulness. She was just careful, the way people are when carefulness has been the survival strategy for long enough that it becomes automatic. "How's the fever?" he said. She paused with the cloth in her hand. "Gone. It's been 2 weeks." "I know how long it's been." She looked at him sideways, just a glance, quick and measuring. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you for that day." "Don't thank me for it." She turned back to the window. "Okay." He looked at the report in front of him that he hadn't been reading. "How many jobs do you have?" "A beat." "That's not—" She stopped, started differently. 3. "Why?" "Because you came here with a fever you'd had for 24 hours and were still planning to work 8 hours. People do that. Not most people who work here." She turned to look at him fully this time, cloth still in her hand. The morning light from the window was behind her, and he couldn't read her face exactly, but the quality of her stillness had changed. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. It was a blunt question, not rude, blunt. The kind of question that comes from someone who has stopped spending energy on social softening because social softening costs energy that goes elsewhere. "I don't know yet," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the window and finished cleaning it and took the cart and left without saying anything else. He thought about that answer for the rest of the afternoon. "I don't know yet." He wasn't sure why he'd said it that way. It was true, which was probably the reason. He had stopped bothering to say things that weren't, somewhere along the way, the calculus of lies having become more expensive than it was worth, in a world where everyone around him was already lying constantly. But it wasn't the kind of answer he gave people. He learned things about her the way he learned most things, not by asking directly, but by paying attention over time, assembling details from context the way you assemble a profile from fragments. She had a brother. She mentioned him once to Marta within earshot, something about medication and a pickup time, and he caught the word dialysis and the name Tommy and filed it away. She didn't take breaks. Not because she was performing work ethic for an audience, but because he watched her when she didn't know she was being watched, and the pattern held. She moved from task to task with the steady rhythm of someone who had stopped expecting rest to be available. She didn't steal. He'd had Marta run a low-level check, the kind he ran on all new staff, and there was nothing. She'd worked at the diner on Ashland for 2 years. She'd worked a weekend cleaning shift at a hotel downtown before that. She'd had one parking ticket 8 months ago. She didn't ask for anything. That was the thing he kept returning to. Everyone who operated inside his world at any level eventually asked for something. A favor, a word in someone's ear, protection for a cousin, a look the other way. It was the ecosystem. You got close enough to power, and you started pointing at things you wanted. It was human nature, at least among the humans he'd been surrounded by for 30 years. Chloe Bennett cleaned his house, took her pay, and went home. He found this unusual enough that he started watching for it to break, for the moment when the ask would arrive. He waited for it with the patient attention of someone who knew from long experience that everyone eventually got to the point. The ask came 6 weeks after she'd started. He just didn't expect the shape it took. He was in the kitchen at an unusual hour, just past 9 p.m., which was when he sometimes came down when he couldn't focus in the study. And she was there because she was on a closing shift for one of the weeks when he needed extra coverage, and Marta had adjusted the schedule. She was mopping the far end of the kitchen and had earbuds in and didn't hear him come in. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter and watched her for a moment. She felt his presence eventually, the way people do, and pulled one earbud out and turned. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't know you—" "It's fine." She was going to put the earbud back in. He could see the motion starting, and then something changed in her face. Not a decision exactly, more like something that had been sitting behind her sternum had gotten too heavy to keep carrying, and had just, at that specific moment, shifted forward. "Can I ask you something?" she said. There it was. He'd been waiting for it so long, it almost felt like relief. "Yes," he said. "My brother needs a kidney transplant," she said. "He's 20 years old. He's been on dialysis for 14 months. There's a procedure, a surgeon who can do it, and Tommy's moved up on the list, but the hospital needs $60,000 for the surgery and the post-op care and the insurance." She stopped, looked at the mop in her hands, then back at him. "There are gaps in what the insurance covers. The hospital won't schedule the surgery without it." Victor said nothing. "I've been saving," she said. "I have 11,000. I've been saving since before I came here." A pause. "I know what I'm asking." "Do you?" he said. She held his gaze. Her hands on the mop were steady. "I'm asking a man I don't know, who I've been told to never ask anything of, to give me $60,000 for a hospital bill. Yes, I know what I'm asking." "Why me?" he said. "Because you're the only person I know who has it." The simplicity of that was remarkable, not because of the logic was obvious, but because she'd said it without apology, without inflation, without the layering of tragedy that people usually built around these requests to make them harder to deny. She'd stated the thing as a fact and left it there. "What do you have to offer me in return?" he said. He watched her absorb that question. He watched her decide whether to be offended by it, and then decide not to be, filing it somewhere practical. "I can work," she said. "I can work for you, as long as you need. Whatever the terms are." "Whatever the terms are," he repeated. She didn't flinch. "Within reason," she said, "but mostly, yes." He looked at her for a long time. 5 years, he said. She blinked. "What?" "You work exclusively for this household for 5 years. You don't take secondary employment. You don't discuss anything you see or hear in this house with anyone outside it. You're available when the household requires it." He set down the glass. "I pay $60,000 to the hospital, directly. Today." She stared at him. He watched her calculating. Took 5 years, what that meant, what it cost, what it gave her. He watched her find the answer at the bottom of the calculation. "Tommy lives," she said quietly. Not to him, to herself. "That's the offer," Victor said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were clear. "Okay," she said. "I'll have my attorney draw up a contract." "Okay," she said again. He turned to leave. He was halfway out of the kitchen when she said his name. Not his title. Not a deferential Mr. Russo the way everyone else called him. His name? Victor. He stopped. "Why 5 years?" she said. "You could have said anything. You could have said 10. Why 5? He didn't turn around. "Because that's what it's worth," he said, and left. He called the hospital's billing department from his study at 9:43 p.m. and had the $60,000 transferred by 10:15. He did not examine why he'd said 5. The contract was signed the following morning in the sitting room off the main hall, with Victor's attorney present and a copy for Chloe that she folded carefully and placed in her bag without reading it in front of them. The attorney left. Victor went to the study. She went back to work. It was that simple. It was that strange. In the weeks that followed, the household settled into a new arrangement that no one named. Chloe's hours expanded. She was on the property 6 days out of 7, sometimes 7, and the work itself shifted in nature. Less cleaning, more management, the kind of quiet operational competency that Marta had been providing for years and was, apparently, more than willing to share. Marta was 62 and had a bad hip and the kind of accumulated domestic knowledge that she was practical enough to want passed on to someone capable. She tested Chloe the way she tested everything, briefly and without warning, and seemed satisfied quickly. Victor watched this happen from a distance. Tommy had the surgery 11 days after the money transferred. Chloe asked Marta for the day off. Didn't ask Victor, asked Marta, and came back the following day with the particular quality of someone who has been holding their breath for a long time and has just, tentatively, exhaled. She didn't say anything about it. He didn't ask. 3 weeks after the surgery, she came to the study doorway. She knocked now, always knocked even when the door was open, a specific consideration he'd noticed, and said, "Tommy's being discharged tomorrow. I just wanted you to know, since it was your money." She said it the way people say things that are difficult to say plainly without making them either too big or too small. She'd found the middle of it. "Good," Victor said. She nodded, started to leave. "Chloe," she stopped. "The money is not owed to me," he said. "The time is. There's a difference." She thought about that. "Okay," she said, and left. 6 months into the contract, he found her in the kitchen at midnight. She had a textbook open on the counter. Anatomy, from the cover, thick and dog-eared, and a notebook beside it covered in handwriting so compact it was nearly illegible from where he stood. She had a glass of water and was eating crackers from a sleeve and reading with the focused attention of someone doing 2 things at once that both required full concentration. "What are you studying?" he said. She looked up without the startle. She'd heard him on the stairs, he realized. She'd always heard him on the stairs. She'd just stopped reacting like it was a threat. "Emergency medical response," she said. "Certification." She looked back at the textbook. "I've always wanted to. I just never had time before." He poured water and sat on the other side of the counter. She glanced up at him once, then went back to the book. He read the report he'd brought down. She read the textbook. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the small sound of pages turning. After 40 minutes, she closed the book and gathered her things. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. After she was gone, he sat in the kitchen for another 10 minutes without reading anything and thought about the specific quality of that silence, which had been different from the silence that usually populated rooms he was in. Less like waiting, more like existing. He didn't know what to do with that. The knife came on a Thursday in March. He'd known there was a problem inside the organization for 3 months. He'd known it with the slow, unhappy certainty of someone who has spent 30 years reading people and has started reading one of them wrong. There was a pattern of information getting out, small things, specific enough to be leaks and structured enough to be deliberate. He'd been narrowing the field. He'd been almost certain for 2 weeks. He hadn't been quite certain enough. The meeting was in the warehouse district, late, 11 p.m., the kind of hour that erased witnesses, and the man across the table from him was Dominic Ferrara, who had been with the Russo organization for 9 years and who Victor had, until recently, considered one of the 3 men he trusted most. The knife came from behind. Victor heard it before he felt it, a displacement of air, a body moving too fast for the context. And he was already turning when it caught him in the left side, below the ribs. Not deep. A deflected entry, caught on an angle because he'd started to move. He put his elbow back hard into the man behind him and heard something crack, and the knife was out, which was the wrong thing, and he was bleeding. What happened in the next 6 minutes, he didn't narrate to himself later. It was kinetic and bloody, and it ended with Dominic Ferrara face down on the warehouse floor, and 2 other men not in a position to go anywhere. And Victor was in the car with Marco driving fast, and Marco saying they needed a doctor, and Victor saying, not yet, not yet. Because the doctor the organization used was a man who reported to 3 people above the level of the rank where Ferrara had been operating, and Victor needed to know tonight, right now, this hour, whether what had happened in that warehouse had been Ferrara acting alone or Ferrara acting for someone. He needed to think. He needed to think without anyone knowing he'd been cut. He said, "Take me home." Marco said, "Victor, home," he said. 7. Chloe was in the main floor hallway with a basket of folded linens when the front door opened. She saw him, and she saw the way he was holding his left side, and she put the basket down. "What happened?" she said. "Get a first aid kit," he said. She'd completed her emergency medical certification 6 weeks ago. He hadn't thought about that fact until this moment, when she looked at the hand he was pressing against his side and said, with the flat certainty of someone who had just run a rapid assessment, "That's a puncture wound." "Yes," he said. "Deep?" "I don't think so." "You don't—" She stopped. "Come with me." She moved him to the utility room off the kitchen. "Better light," she said, "better surface." And she got gloves and the kit, and she cleaned the wound and assessed the depth with a focus that he recognized as the same focus she brought to everything else, the complete attention of someone who had decided to do a thing right. Her hands didn't shake. "This needs stitches," she said. "I know. I can close it with butterfly strips, but I'd strongly recommend—" "Do what you can do," he said. She looked at him once, then she went to work. The silence while she worked was different from any silence he'd been in with her before. It was intimate in a way that neither of them could pretend it wasn't. Her hands against his skin, the careful focus of someone responsible for another person's body, the low light, and the fact that outside this room, a situation was unresolved and complicated, and here in this room the only thing happening was this. "You have 3 similar scars," she said quietly. "On your back, left side." "Yes," he said. "You've done this before." "Several times." She applied the last strip and taped a clean dressing over it. Then she peeled off the gloves and washed her hands and didn't look at him for a moment. When she did, something in her face was different. Not afraid, not performing calm, just present with the reality of what this was, who he was, what it meant that he'd come home bleeding from a knife wound and said, "Take me home." "Victor," she said. "Don't," he said. She nodded once. "Okay." She started packing up the kit. "You need to rest for 24 hours, or that closes wrong." "I know." She stood and picked up the kit. She was halfway to the door when he said, "Chloe." She stopped, didn't turn around right away, then did. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he had thanked her for anything. She stood in the doorway with the first aid kit and looked at him for a long moment, and her face was doing something complicated that she wasn't quite managing to neutralize. And then she said, very quietly, "Don't get stabbed again." She left. He sat in the utility room with the cleaned wound and listened to the house settle around him and thought about the particular warmth of careful hands and the fact that there were now 3 people in the world he trusted, and one of them had come to him 6 months ago with $11,000 in savings and a dying brother and nothing to offer except her time. He didn't know what to call what he was feeling. He knew, with the precision that 30 years had built into him, that he was going to have to figure it out. What he didn't know yet was that across the city, in an office tower on the other end of Chicago's power structure, Leo Donati was looking at a photograph of Victor Russo's estate and saying to the man beside him, "Now. We move now." Victor found the leak by Friday. It took him 48 hours of conversations he conducted from the study while standing because sitting made the wound pull. 2 phone calls he never would have made unless the situation had narrowed to the point where the cost of making them was less than the cost of not knowing, and 1 document, a routing record from a property transfer 18 months ago that shouldn't have existed and did, filed under a subsidiary name that traced back through 3 layers of corporate insulation to Leo Donati's holding company. Dominic Ferrara hadn't been working alone. He'd been working with someone still inside the organization, someone above Ferrara's level, someone who had access to the routing records, to the warehouse schedule, to the specific meeting time on Thursday night that only 5 people had known. 5 people. Victor stood at the window of his study on Saturday morning with coffee he hadn't drunk and the routing document on the desk behind him, and thought about those 5 names with the cold, methodical patience of a man who had built everything he had on the ability to be certain before he moved. He was not certain yet. That was the problem. Marco Vitali appeared in the doorway at 9 a.m., which was when Victor had told him to appear. Marco was 55, built like someone who had been large in his youth and had redistributed the mass over the decades into something dense and deliberate. He'd been with Victor since the beginning, before the beginning, technically, since they'd grown up 4 blocks apart, and Marco had been the one to introduce Victor to the man who'd first given him work. He had a wife and 3 adult children and a house in Oak Park, and he was the only person in the organization Victor had ever told anything true to. Victor looked at him for a long time before he spoke. Marco looked back. He'd always been good at that, at not filling silence with reassurance or explanation. He just waited. "Tell me about Thursday," Victor said. Marco's face didn't change. "What about Thursday? Who knew about the meeting? You, me, Ferrara, Paul Greco, and Sal." A pause. "Same 5 as always for a warehouse site. And nobody else." "Nobody else." Victor picked up the routing document and held it out. Marco crossed the room and took it and read it. Victor watched his face while he read. Marco's face did almost nothing. A slight tension around the jaw, a single pass of the eyes over the page, then a second slower pass. Then he set the document back on the desk. "Where did you get this?" Marco said. "Does it matter?" Marco looked at the document on the desk. "Sal," he said, not a question. "That's one possibility," Victor said. "Sal Marchetti has been with us for 7 years. Ferrara was with us for 9. Marco was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing yet," Victor said. "I want you to watch. I want you to watch Sal, and I want you to watch Paul Greco, and I want you to do it without either of them knowing you're watching." "And you?" "I'm going to have a conversation," Victor said. "Not with either of them. With someone who has been moving product through a distribution chain that Donati also uses. Someone who might have heard something." Marco nodded once. He picked up his coat from the chair where he'd left it. Then he stopped. "Victor." "What?" "The wound. It's fine. Marta said you didn't sleep Thursday night." "Marta talks too much." "Marta talks exactly the right amount," Marco said. "Get some sleep." He left. Victor stood at the window and drank the cold coffee and thought about Sal Marchetti, who had 3 kids of his own and a gambling problem he thought nobody knew about, and Paul Greco, who had been clean as far as Victor could tell, but who had recently bought a house that was slightly too expensive for what he was legitimately making. 2 possibilities. 1 answer. He needed to be certain before he moved. Debt. Chloe found out about the knife on Saturday because Marta told her. Not in detail. Marta was not a woman who gave details she didn't consider necessary. But enough. That he'd come home hurt Thursday night. That someone inside the organization had been involved in the attack. That the house was on a tighter protocol this weekend, which meant the security detail was doubled, and no one came in or out without clearance, including deliveries. Chloe absorbed the standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and said, "Is he okay?" "He's working," Marta said, which was her way of saying yes. Chloe went back to the coffee and thought about Thursday night. She thought about the utility room and the wound that had been deeper than he'd admitted, and the way he'd sat still and let her work without making it difficult, which she'd recognized as a form of trust, even if he would never call it that. She thought about "don't get stabbed again," which had come out of her mouth before she'd fully decided to say it. She hadn't decided to say it. That was the part she kept coming back to. She'd been careful these 7 months. Careful in a specific way, not cold, not distant, but boundaried. She was here to work. She was here because of Tommy and the contract, and $60,000 that had kept her brother alive. And the only honest transaction in any of that was the labor she gave in return. She knew what Victor Russo was. She was not naive about the world that existed just past the edge of her visibility in this house. The low conversations in rooms whose doors closed when she approached. The men who came and went at hours that weren't business hours and never met her eyes. She was not naive and she was not pretending, and she had told herself repeatedly and with conviction that none of it was her concern. But she'd put her hands on his wound and she'd felt the shape of the older scars beneath her fingers, and she'd thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that this was a man who had been absorbing damage alone for a very long time. She didn't know what to do with that thought. She took her coffee to the east sitting room and opened her study materials and did not think about it for the rest of the morning. She was moderately successful. Victor left the estate at 2 p.m. Saturday with 2 men in a car behind him, which was the minimum he'd allow Marco to insist on given the current situation. He went to a bar in Pilsen that didn't look like much from the outside and wasn't meant to. The man he was meeting was named Eddie Crane. Eddie was not organized crime in any structural sense. He was the kind of person who existed in the spaces between structures, doing business with whoever needed his particular set of services, which involved moving things from one location to another without the paperwork that official channels required. He had worked, at various points, with the Russo organization, with 2 of the North Side outfits, and, more recently, which was what made him useful, with people connected to Leo Donati. Eddie was already at the bar when Victor arrived. He was a small man in his mid-40s with the permanent alertness of someone who had made a career out of knowing when to be somewhere else. He had a beer in front of him that he hadn't been drinking. Victor sat down across from him and didn't order anything. "You look tired," Eddie said. "Tell me about the Donati movement," Victor said. "Last 6 months." Eddie's eyes moved to the 2 men stationed near the door. Then back to Victor. "That's a broad question." "I have time." Eddie picked up his beer and put it down again without drinking. "Donati's been building. Everybody knows that much. He's been pulling people. Not big names, middle tier, the kind of guys who don't make news when they change sides. Supply chain people, logistics." He paused. "He's also been buying information. From inside organizations. From inside yours specifically," Eddie said. He said it without apology or inflection, the way a man delivers bad news he's been paid to deliver. "I heard 6 months ago that somebody had taken money. I don't know who. I don't know the amount." He met Victor's eyes. "I heard the number 20,000. 20,000. A number that meant something to Victor immediately. He kept his face still. "That's specific." "I have a good memory," Eddie said. Victor looked at him for a long moment. "Greco," he said. Eddie said nothing, which was also an answer. Victor stood up. "Victor," Eddie said, "if Donati knows about Thursday, about what happened to Ferrara, he's going to move fast. He's not going to wait for you to stabilize." "I know," Victor said. "He might already be moving." "I know," Victor said again, and left. He was back at the estate by 4. He went to the study and called Marco and said one word, "Greco." And Marco said, "I'll handle it," and the line went dead. The efficient shorthand of men who had been operating together long enough to compress necessary violence into single syllables. He sat at the desk and looked at the routing document. Paul Greco had been with the organization for 4 years. He was 38, came from a family with loose connections to a disbanded South Side outfit, had come to Victor through a referral that had checked out at the time. He was not someone Victor had ever fully trusted. He didn't fully trust anyone, but he'd been reliable, and his work was accurate, and $20,000 was a lot of money for a man with a house that was already slightly beyond his means. 20,000 for information that had almost gotten Victor killed. He sat with that number and felt something cold move through him, which was not anger exactly. Anger was too hot, too fast. What he felt was the specific temperature of a conclusion, the thing that settles in when the last ambiguity resolves, and what remains is only the fact of what has to happen next. He heard a knock on the study door. "Come in," he said. It was Chloe. She stood in the doorway without the cleaning cart, which meant she wasn't there to clean. She had her coat still on, which meant she'd just come from outside. She sometimes walked the backgrounds in the late afternoon. Her cheeks were cold-flushed, and she was looking at him with the specific expression he'd learned to recognize over 7 months as the one she wore when she'd decided to say something she wasn't sure she should say. "You look worse than you did Thursday," she said. "I'm fine," he said. "You're gray." She didn't move from the doorway. "Have you eaten today?" "That's not... I'm going to take that as no," she said. "I'm making something. You don't have to come down, but I'm going to leave it outside the door if you don't." He looked at her. She looked back. There was no performance in it, no strategic softness, no angling, just a woman who had looked at him and seen that he was running on empty and had decided to do something practical about it. "I'll come down," he said. Something moved briefly across her face. She nodded and left. He sat for another minute, then put the routing document in the locked drawer and followed her. She made eggs and toast, which was not what he would have expected and was exactly right. Not elaborate, not a performance of care, just food. She put it on the counter and made coffee and sat on the other side with her own cup, and he ate, and neither of them said anything for a while. "Who was it?" she said eventually. He looked at her. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "I know I'm not supposed to know things." A pause. "But you came down, so..." He picked up the coffee. "Someone who was paid to give information to people who want me dead," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Did you know them well?" 4 years. She nodded slowly. "That's worse," she said. "When it's someone you actually knew." She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her coffee cup. "My mom's sister stole from us when I was 17, cleaned out the savings account my mom had been building since before I was born. $4,200. She paused. "I know that's not... The scale is different, but I remember thinking the money wasn't even the worst part." "What was the worst part?" he said. She looked up. "The recalculation," she said. "Going back through every conversation, every moment you trusted them, and seeing it differently. That takes something out of you." He looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said. "It does." She looked down again. The kitchen was quiet. "Victor," she said. His name again in her mouth, the way she'd been saying it for months now, without the title, without the particular deference that everyone else gave his name before they used it. Just the word, just him. "What?" he said. "Be careful," she said. "Whatever happens next, be careful." "What?" She got up, put her cup in the sink, and was halfway out of the kitchen before she seemed to stop herself. She stood in the doorway with her back to him for a moment. Then she turned around. "And don't argue with me about the wound dressing. I need to change it tonight, or it'll close wrong and you'll have a problem in a week." He almost said something. He felt it. A response forming that wasn't the kind of response he gave people in this house, in this life. Something that wasn't a direction or an acknowledgement, but something else. Something warmer and less managed. He said, "After 9. She nodded. "After 9, she said, and left. He sat in the kitchen alone and thought about the recalculation, and about what it cost, and about the fact that he had been recalculating for 30 years, and somewhere along the way had stopped expecting the arithmetic to come out to anything other than loss. Marco called at 7:45 p.m. "It's done," he said. Victor said, "Any complications?" "No." A pause. He gave up 2 contacts before the end, both Donati's people, consistent with what we already knew. "Good." Another pause, longer this time. "Victor, Donati's going to know by tomorrow. Greco was in contact with them twice a week minimum. When the contact stops, I know." He's going to move on the estate. I know, Marco. We need to... Come in tomorrow morning, Victor said. Bring Sal. He paused, making one final calculation on that name. And bring me something that tells me definitively whether Sal was clean. If he was, then we shore up and we prepare. Victor looked at the window, full dark outside. If he wasn't, I'll know by morning, Marco said. The line went dead. Victor sat in the study for a long time after that. He thought about the estate's security layout, the gate systems, the exterior cameras, the response time from the closest two safe houses where he kept additional people. He thought about the 8 men currently on the property and whether 8 was enough, and concluded, with the clean-edged logic that danger always clarified, that it probably wasn't. He thought about Leo Donati, who he had met twice in person over the years. A careful, patient man who built things slowly and struck fast, and tried to calculate how fast. Fast, he decided. The answer was fast. He thought about Chloe, which was less calculated and more immediate, a thought that arrived before the managed ones could redirect it. Chloe in this house. Chloe, who had been here 7 months, and who had never asked to know anything about his world, and had nevertheless ended up knowing enough, by proximity and intelligence, and the simple accumulation of time spent in the same space as violence, to be considered a liability by anyone looking in from outside. He needed to get her out of the estate. He went upstairs at 9:15 and knocked on the door of the east sitting room, which she'd converted into a combination workspace and study area because the light was good, and it was far enough from the main operational parts of the house that she could pretend the operational parts weren't happening. She was at the table with the anatomy textbook, reading glasses on, which he hadn't seen before, small wireframe things that she took off quickly when he came in, not embarrassed exactly, just automatic, the reflex of someone used to not wanting to be seen in moments of vulnerability. You need to leave the estate, he said. She looked at him. What? There may be a threat incoming. It's not safe here. She took that in. When? Possibly within 24 hours, possibly sooner. She put the textbook down flat. Where would I go? I have a safe house in Evanston. Marco can drive you tonight. She looked at him steadily. And what happens here while I'm in Evanston? We handle it, he said. How many men does Donati have? She said. He stopped. That's not... How many? Chloe. Victor. Her voice was flat and certain and entirely without hysteria. I've spent 7 months in this house. I'm not a civilian in the way you're treating me right now. I know what the situation is. How many men does Donati run? He looked at her for a long moment. Significant numbers, he said. More than I currently have on the property. She held his gaze. Then you need everyone you have, she said, including people who know this house. You're not... I did my EMT certification, she said. I know the layout of this building better than most of your people. I know where the medical supplies are, where the secondary exits are, where the power controls are. She stood up. Sending me to Evanston costs you someone useful. He stared at her. This isn't a negotiation, he said. No, she agreed, but I'm not leaving. She picked up the reading glasses and put them in their case with the careful precision of someone closing a subject. Change of dressing, that was the deal. She walked past him into the hallway. He stood in the empty sitting room and felt, for the first time in longer than he could locate, the specific helplessness of being unable to categorize a situation, of standing at the edge of something that his 30 years of operational thinking had no clean framework for. She wasn't an asset. She wasn't a liability. She wasn't someone who had made a calculation and was playing an angle. She was just staying. He didn't know what to do with that. He'd built his entire life around the certainty that everyone eventually left, or turned, or became the thing you had to defend against. He went down the hallway after her. The wound dressing was changed in silence. Her hands were steady and warm, and she worked quickly and without commentary. When she finished, she pressed the last strip of tape flat with 2 fingers and held it there for a moment, not moving, just applying pressure. And he was aware of the specific quality of that stillness, the intention in it, and then she let go and gathered the materials. Try to sleep, she said. Chloe, he said. She turned. If it comes to it, he stopped, started differently. If something happens, there's a room off the wine cellar. Behind the second rack on the left, there's a door. It locks from the inside. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're showing me where to hide," she said. "Yes." She said nothing, just looked at him, and he looked back, and the space between them had a quality it hadn't had 7 months ago, or 5 months ago, or even 3 weeks ago. "Okay," she said quietly. And then, "Victor, don't get killed." She left. He stood in the corridor and listened to her footsteps on the stairs, and thought that he had said that same thing, in various forms to various people over 30 years of this life, and no one had ever said it back to him. His phone rang at 11:53 p.m. It was Marco. "It wasn't Sal," Marco said. "Sal's clean, I'm certain." "Good," Victor said. "Victor." Marco's voice had a quality in it that Victor hadn't heard before. "I just got word from a contact at the 43rd Precinct. There was movement tonight in the warehouse district. 4 vehicles, 8 to 12 men, heading north. North. Toward the North Shore." "How long?" Victor said. 20 minutes, Marco said. "Maybe less." Victor was already moving. "Call everyone in," he said. "Lock down the perimeter, nobody in or out." He was at the top of the main stairs. Below him, the house was quiet. "And Marco, don't let them get inside." "Understood," Marco said. Victor looked down the hallway toward the east sitting room where Chloe's light was still on, and thought, for the first time in 11 years, that there was something in this house worth protecting that wasn't the house itself. "They're coming now," he said, half to Marco, half to no one, and started down the stairs toward whatever the night was about to demand of him. The first vehicle hit the gate at 11:58 p.m. Victor heard it from the main floor. A sound like a truck taking something solid at speed. The gate system screaming metal before the backup generators kicked in and the exterior lights flooded the grounds in white. He was already at the security panel in the hallway off the foyer, pulling up the camera feeds, and what he saw on the monitors made him do a rapid, cold count. 4 vehicles. 3 SUVs and a cargo van. The van was already disgorging men from the side door. He counted 8 in the first 10 seconds. Moving in the practiced low crouch of people who had done this before, spreading wide across the front lawn to avoid clustering. The gate was damaged, but holding. For now. He keyed the radio. "East perimeter, report." Static, then, "Movement on the east wall. 2 men, they're cutting." "South?" "Clear so far." "Don't trust clear," Victor said. "Put 2 men on the south regardless." He had 10 people on the property tonight. He'd added 2 after Marco's call at 7, which had felt like enough at the time and now felt like a calculation made in a different reality. Donati had sent a minimum of 12, possibly more still in the vehicles. The math was not good. He moved to the weapons cabinet in the study, keyed it open, took out the Glock he kept there as a secondary, and checked the load. Full. He put it in his waistband at the back and kept the primary in his right hand and went to the foot of the stairs. "Chloe," he said. Loud enough to carry, not loud enough to carry further than the second floor. She appeared at the top of the stairs in 30 seconds, fully dressed, which told him she hadn't been sleeping. She had her phone in one hand and her face was controlled in the way it got when she was processing something fast and hadn't finished yet. "They're here," he said. "I heard the gate," she said. She came down the stairs without being told to. "What do you need?" "The cellar room," he said. "I showed you what—" "I'm not going to the cellar room." "Chloe? Where are your medical supplies?" she said. "The serious ones, not the kit in the utility room. If people get hurt tonight, you'll need a staging area." He looked at her. The exterior lights were throwing moving shadows through the front windows, and somewhere outside one of his men was shouting coordinates into a radio, and the gate was making a sound now that suggested it was not going to hold much longer. "Library," he said. "East wall, the cabinet behind the atlas stand." She nodded once and moved toward the library without another word, and he let her go because there was no time for the alternative. He keyed the radio again. "Gate status. They've got a second vehicle on it. It's coming down in under a minute." Fall back to secondary positions, Victor said. Draw them toward the east entrance. Do not let them split and come in from both sides. He moved to the front of the house and took position at the window beside the main door, staying back from the glass, using the wall. Outside the gate buckled. He heard it, a groan of steel giving way. And then the exterior lights caught the first two men coming through the gap, and his people opened up from the secondary positions in the hedge line, and the night turned into something loud and specific and without any margin. The next 40 minutes existed in a different kind of time. Not slow, not fast, compressed. The way extreme situations compress into a sequence of immediate problems, each one replacing the last the moment it resolved. Victor moved through his own house like a man moving through a building he'd memorized in the dark, which was almost literally true. He had memorized it years ago, not for this specific scenario, but for scenarios shaped like this one. He knew every doorway, every sight line, every structural wall that would stop a round, and every partition that wouldn't. Donati's men were good, not exceptional. Not the kind of professional that came from military backgrounds with real training, but experienced, organized, and they moved with the coordination of people who had drilled together. They came in through the east entrance when his people drew them there, which was the plan. But 3 of them peeled off at the last moment and went south, which meant someone had told them the south position was light. Someone had told them. Victor registered that fact while moving through the east corridor and filed it in the part of his mind that was keeping track of things to be examined later, if there was a later. Right now, the south side had 2 men against 3, and the radio had gone quiet in the way that radios went quiet when one of the parties was no longer able to transmit. He went south. He found one of his men, a kid named Reyes, who was 26 and had been with the organization for 2 years, sitting against the south wall with his hand pressed against his thigh and his face the color of old paper. The wound was high on the leg, not arterial. The bleeding was steady, but not the kind that ended things in minutes. Victor told him to keep pressure and keep down and moved past him toward the sound of movement in the south corridor. He came around the corner and the man there saw him at the same moment he saw the man, and what followed was fast and close and left Victor with a gash along his left forearm where he'd blocked the wrong way and left the other man on the floor. He stood in the south corridor and breathed. The radio crackled. Marco's voice. "I'm at the west entrance. 4 of ours still operational. I count 3 of theirs down. How many inside?" "At least 2 more," Victor said. "Possibly 3. Gate is fully down. They're not sending reinforcements. I think this is the full deployment." "Don't assume," Victor said, which was what he always said and was always right. He moved back toward the main body of the house. He found the situation in the library. He came in through the east door and stopped. Chloe was at the east wall cabinet, which she'd found and opened, laying out supplies on the reading table with the organized efficiency of someone running a procedure. She'd turned on only the low lamp on the far end, keeping the room dim, and she'd moved the leather chair away from the window. She looked up when he came in, clocked the arm, and said, "Sit down." "Not yet," he said. "Victor, not yet," he said again. 2 unaccounted for, possibly inside. "I need to clear the house before—" His radio crackled and he held up a hand and listened. It was one of his men on the north end. "We've got one contained in the dining room. He's not going anywhere." "The other?" Victor said. Silence. "The other," Victor said again. "Lost him in the transition between East and Main Hall," the voice said. "He's somewhere in the main body of the house." Victor looked at the library door he'd come through. He looked at Chloe. She had a roll of gauze in one hand and she was absolutely still, listening to exactly what he was listening to. He crossed to her in 4 steps and put himself between her and the main library door on the west side, the one that opened toward the central hallway, and then the door opened. The man who came through was big, not tall but wide, carrying extra weight in the shoulders that suggested either serious time in a gym or the particular density of someone who had been in physical work for decades. He had a gun in his right hand and he brought it up when he saw Victor, and Victor brought his up at the same time, and for a specific fraction of a second the room was a standoff. "Put it down," Victor said. The man didn't put it down. His eyes moved between Victor and Chloe, and he did a calculation that Victor could see him doing, the rapid violence math of a man assessing his options. and then something shifted in his face. A decision landing, and Victor saw what was about to happen. He heard Chloe move behind him. The shot was hers. She'd found the secondary weapon in the cabinet. There was always one, in every room, because Victor had learned that lesson at 32 and had never unlearned it. And she fired once from a position just off his left shoulder, a controlled breath, and a flat crack. And the man's gun arm dropped, and he went sideways into the bookcase, and didn't get up. The room was very loud for a moment in the way that rooms are loud after a shot when the shot is over. A ringing fullness that then gradually thinned back to silence. Victor turned. Chloe was standing with the gun in both hands, pointed at where the man had been, her stance wide and her breathing hard but controlled. Her face was a color he hadn't seen it before. Not pale, not flushed. Something between. Her eyes were on the man on the floor, and she held the position for a full 3 seconds before she lowered the weapon. Her hands were shaking. Not badly, but they were shaking. She looked at Victor. He looked at her. "You're bleeding on my supplies," she said. Her voice was steady, and the voice was the only thing that was. He looked down. The arm was still going. He crossed to the table and sat on the edge of it, and she put the gun down carefully and picked up the gauze and started wrapping without being asked. Her hand steadied as she worked. Outside the library, the house was going quiet in the way it went quiet after engagements. Not peaceful, but emptied of the specific noise of active violence. He heard his men clearing rooms, heard Marco's voice on the radio confirming positions, heard the word contained used twice and down used once. And by the time Chloe had the arm wrapped, the radio was telling him it was over. He sat on the edge of the library table and looked at the man on the floor and felt the particular aftermath that always arrived. Not relief, not satisfaction. Just the flat, exhausted recognition that the mathematics had come out marginally in his favor this time. "You've shot a gun before," he said. She cut the gauze and taped it. "Twice. At a range. My brother made me go." A pause. He said, "I should know how." "Smart kid," Victor said. She looked up from the arm. Something was moving in her eyes that wasn't the adrenaline subsiding. Something longer and deeper and more complicated. "Is it over?" she said. "For tonight," he said. She nodded. She picked up the gun from the table and held it for a moment, looking at it, and then set it down again. She sat in the chair she'd moved away from the window and put both hands flat on her knees and breathed. In and out, deliberate. The technique of someone who had studied what to do with a body in crisis and was now using it on herself. Victor watched her do that and said nothing. After 2 minutes, she looked up. "Donati's going to try again," she said. "Yes," Victor said. "What happens now?" "Now I find out how he knew the south position was light," Victor said. "And then I deal with that." She absorbed that. "Someone told him," she said. Not a question. "Someone told his men our deployment," he said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "It wasn't Marco." He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" 7 months, she said. "I've watched Marco Vitali for 7 months. That man would set himself on fire before he'd give you up." Victor held her gaze. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't Marco." "Then who?" He said nothing, because the answer that had been forming for the last 40 minutes, the one he'd been holding at arm's length while the house was under assault, was now fully assembled, and it was not an answer he was ready to say aloud. He stood up. "Stay here," he said. "Don't open the door for anyone who doesn't knock 3 times. "Victor, 3 times, he said, and left. Marco was in the main hallway with 4 men, 2 of whom had field dressings that needed better attention. Victor told him to get them to the library, Chloe would manage, and pulled Marco aside. "The south position," Victor said. "Who knew we moved to light coverage there?" Marco's face went very still. "Tonight's adjustment was made at 8 p.m., he said carefully. "After you called me. I relayed to the team leads." He paused. "All 3 team leads. And above team leads? Nobody. That information didn't go above team lead level." Marco's voice had acquired the specific flatness of someone who knew where a line of logic was leading and was following it with their eyes open. Victor. Who are the three team leads? Victor said. He knew. He needed to hear it confirmed. Reyes, Castillo, and Danny Farrell, Marco said. Reyes was bleeding in the south corridor with a leg wound. Castillo was currently at the west entrance. Danny Farrell was... Victor did a rapid mental inventory of the last 40 minutes. Danny Farrell was one of the voices he had not heard on the radio since the initial engagement began. Where's Farrell? Victor said. Marco pulled out his radio, called twice. Nothing. Find him, Victor said. Well, they found Danny Farrell in the garage. He was alive. He was sitting against the wheel well of the second car, knees up, head down, and when Victor and Marco came in with two men behind them, he looked up with the face of someone who already knew the conversation he was about to have. He was 34. He'd been with the organization for 6 years. He had a sister in Naperville and a mother who was sick and a debt. Victor had not known about the debt until this moment. Looking at his face, and he filed that away in the column of things he should have known. Victor crouched in front of him. How much? He said. Farrell looked at the floor. Victor, how much did they pay you? A long silence, then, 40,000. 40,000. The south position, the interior layout details, the timing, the number of men. $40,000. Greco gave them the route to me, Victor said. You gave them the blueprint for tonight. Farrell said nothing. Look at me, Victor said. Farrell looked at him. His eyes were red at the edges, not from crying, from the particular interior pressure of a man who had been carrying a secret for long enough that it had started doing structural damage from the inside. My mother, Farrell said. She needed... There were bills, and I didn't have... He stopped. I know that's not... Stop, Victor said. Farrell stopped. Victor stood up. He stood there for a moment, looking down at a man he had trusted with the kind of information that men went to prison protecting, looking at someone he had eaten dinner with, trained with, worked alongside for 6 years, and he did the recalculation. He went back through 6 years and looked at every moment differently. The work that had been accurate, the referrals that had been reliable, and now the one moment of financial pressure that had cracked what 6 years had built. $40,000 to a man whose mother was sick and who hadn't known how to say so. He thought about what Chloe had said in the kitchen, the recalculation. That takes something out of you. She was right. It did. You gave Leo Donati what he needed to send 12 men into my house, Victor said. One of my people is shot. One is dead. He had gotten that on the radio coming through the hallway. Castillo at the west entrance hadn't made it. 12 years with this organization between the two of them. Farrell's jaw was shaking. Marco, Victor said. Victor, Marco said quietly. Not a question. A pause. A slight inflection that was as close as Marco Vitali ever came to saying, I'll handle it, without saying it. Victor walked out of the garage. He walked back through the house that was his, past the broken glass in the east corridor, and the damage along the south wall, and the room where one of Donati's men would need to be dealt with before morning, and he went to the study and sat down at the desk, and put both hands flat on the surface, and breathed. The arm was throbbing under Chloe's bandage. The wound from Thursday was pulling in a way that meant he'd done something to it during the south corridor. He was running on whatever the body runs on when everything else is gone, that final chemical stubbornness that keeps a person operational past the point where operational makes sense. He sat there for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he'd been avoiding calling. It rang 4 times. Then, Victor. The voice was smooth, unhurried, and fully awake despite it being past 1 in the morning, which meant Leo Donati had been waiting for this call. I take it my people didn't... Your people are done, Victor said. All of them. A pause. Shorter than Victor expected. How many did I lose? Enough, Victor said. A sound that might have been consideration or might have been the performance of consideration. And your own? This conversation is a courtesy, Victor said, I'm going to give you one opportunity to discuss an arrangement that doesn't end with you where Ferrara ended. A longer pause this time. You're in a generous mood for a man who just had his estate stormed. I'm in a clear mood, Victor said. There's a difference. And what kind of arrangement are you proposing? A border, Victor said. Hard lines. South of the river is yours, north is mine. No more movement, no more buying people inside my organization, no more. He stopped because what he was about to say was something he hadn't intended to say, something that had formed on its own from the combination of the night's events and the exhaustion and the specific fury that came from having your house violated. No more sending men into spaces where my people live. The pause after that was different, textured, like Donati was listening to something under the words. Victor, Donati said. He said it the way people say a name when they've understood something. Is there something in that house you're trying to protect? Victor said nothing. Because if there is, Donati said, and his voice had shifted into something deliberate, careful, and precise, then I should tell you something. The information Farrell gave me, I have it all. The layout, the access points, the schedule, all of it. Another pause. Including the staff. Victor's hand tightened on the phone. There's a young woman, Donati said. Bennett. She's been working for you. What, 7, 8 months? She has a brother, Tom, I think. He just had a surgery. A beat. Expensive surgery, I understand, paid for by you. The study was completely silent. This is not a threat, Donati said in the voice of a man making a threat. This is information, so that you understand the full scope of what's on the table when we discuss arrangements. Victor looked at the desk surface beneath his hands. The wood grain, the specific texture of something solid and real. If you touch her, Victor said. The words came out lower and quieter than he intended, stripped of the management he usually put around speech. Just the raw thing underneath. If you touch her, or her brother, or anyone connected to her, there's no arrangement on earth that protects you. You understand that. The silence on the other end stretched for 5 full seconds. I think, Donati said slowly, that I understand the situation considerably better now. He paused one more time. I'll be in touch about the arrangement. The line went dead. Victor sat with the phone in his hand. He sat there and understood, with the absolute clarity of a man who had just heard himself speak without management or strategy or the layer of cold that he kept between himself and everything that mattered. He sat there and understood that Leo Donati had just learned something that Victor himself had been unwilling to acknowledge until the words were already out of his mouth. He set the phone down. He sat in the study alone and thought about a 24-year-old woman with a sick brother and $11,000 in savings who had walked into his house to clean floors and had somehow, in 7 months, become the thing he would level everything else to protect. He didn't know when it had happened. He didn't know what to call it. What he knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a man who had spent 30 years reading situations correctly and now had to read this one, was that Donati knowing her name meant she was no longer safe in any version of the world where Donati was still operating, which meant the arrangement Victor had been about to propose was no longer possible, which meant there was only one direction left. He picked up the phone and called Marco. The conversation with Donati is done, he said when Marco answered. Done how? Marco said. Done completely, Victor said. He knows about Chloe. A silence. Then Marco said, very quietly, how much does he know? Enough, Victor said. The same word I used with him. He looked at the window. Outside the estate, his people were beginning the necessary work of the aftermath, and beyond the grounds, the city went on in its ordinary darkness, indifferent and enormous. Get everyone we have, all of them, every resource. I want it ready by morning. Victor, Marco said, if we go at Donati fully, I know, Victor said. This is everything on the table. I know, Marco. A long pause. Then Marco said, okay, and that was that. Victor put the phone down for the second time. He had built the Russo organization for 30 years. He had protected it, shaped it, bled for it, and sacrificed everything that had ever asked to matter to him on its behalf, because the organization was what he was, and he had accepted that with the grim practicality of a man who understood his own nature. He looked at the routing document still in the locked drawer, the first thread in a chain that had led to this desk at 1:47 in the morning, and thought about a woman in the library with gauze and steady hands who had fired once, clearly, to keep him alive, and who had told him 3 hours ago that she was not going to the cellar room. He had told Donati, "If you touch her." And in those words he had handed Donati a weapon more dangerous than anything the man had sent through his gate tonight. He had handed him the knowledge that Victor Russo, who for 11 years had made himself into something without vulnerabilities, had found something worth losing everything to protect. He stood up from the desk. The study felt different at 1:53 in the morning than it did at any other hour. Smaller, more honest somehow, stripped of the daytime performance of authority. He stood in it and thought for exactly 90 seconds about what he was going to do and what it was going to cost. And then he stopped thinking about the cost, because the cost had stopped being relevant the moment Donati said her name. He went to the library. Chloe had been working. 2 of his men were in the library when he arrived. One sitting in the leather chair with his shoulder wrapped, one standing near the window doing the careful, shallow breathing of someone managing pain with stubbornness. She was at the reading table with the supplies laid out in the organized sequence of someone who had been treating wounds for the last hour, and she looked up when Victor came in with the specific attention of someone who had been listening for his footsteps. She read his face. He knew she read it because something in her own face shifted. Not alarm, not the performed calm she sometimes wore. Something more specific. Recognition. "Give us a minute," Victor said to his men. They left. Chloe set down the gauze and turned to face him fully. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't lean back. She just stood with her hands at her sides and looked at him the way she always looked at him when something was about to be said that neither of them could take back. "Donati knows who you are," Victor said. She was quiet for a moment. "How specific?" "Your name. Your brother's name. The surgery." He held her gaze. "The connection between you and me." Her jaw tightened once, a single involuntary movement, and then smoothed out. "What does that mean for Tommy?" "Right now, nothing. I have people watching the hospital starting tonight." He paused. "That was the first call I made." Something moved through her face then, a wave of something that she contained quickly, pressing it down below the waterline before it could surface fully. Not gratitude. Deeper than that. He watched her press it down and hold it there. "What happens now?" she said. "Tomorrow I go at Donati directly," Victor said. "Not defensively, not with arrangements. We end this completely." She looked at him for a long moment. "And if it doesn't go the way you plan?" "It will." "Victor." "It will," he said again. He said it the way he said everything he meant absolutely, flat, no inflation. "But I need you to understand that the situation has changed. Donati knows your value to me. That makes you a target independently of the estate, independently of the organization. From this point forward, you don't go anywhere without one of my people. You don't contact anyone outside this house using your own phone, and you don't—" "Okay," she said. He stopped. "Okay," she said again. No argument, no push, just the word, clear and immediate. He looked at her. "That's it? You just told me my brother has protection and that you're going to end the thing that's threatening him," she said. What would I argue with? She picked up the gauze from the table. "Sit down. Let me look at the arm." He sat. She unwrapped what she'd done earlier and examined the wound in the better light, and her face did the focused, inward thing it did when she was assessing. Her hands were not shaking now. They hadn't been shaking for a while, he realized. She'd moved past the adrenaline of the library into the steady territory beyond it. "You also did something to the side," she said. "The south corridor," he said. "Show me." He did. She looked at it and made a sound that was not quite a word. "It's not worse," she said finally, "but it's not better." She rebandaged it with the particular tension of someone who had run this calculation and arrived at an answer she didn't love. "You need actual medical care. A doctor." "After tomorrow," he said. She looked at him. Then, "After tomorrow," she said, and finished taping the dressing. She didn't step back immediately after she was done. She stayed close, close enough that he could see the precise color of the fatigue under her eyes, the place where the night had accumulated in her face, and she was looking at the bandage she'd just applied with an expression that was about more than the bandage. "Victor," she said quietly. "Don't," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said. "You were," he said. She looked up. They were close enough that the space between them was the kind of space that has a quality, a specific temperature, a thing it does to your awareness of your own breathing. "Be careful," she said. Just that. The same two words she'd said before, but different now. Weighted with everything the night had put between them. The gate coming down, and the shot in the library, and Donati's voice saying her name through Victor's phone. "I will," he said. He stood up. He stood there for one more second than he needed to, close to her, close enough to see the pulse in her throat working steadily despite everything. Then he went to the door. "Victor," she said. He stopped. He didn't turn around. "When?" she said. He walked out. He slept 3 hours. Not because he needed to, but because his body made the decision at 4 a.m. and overruled his intentions entirely, dropping him into a heavy, dreamless dark that lasted until 7:15 when his phone went off and he came back to consciousness in the complete and immediate way that years of operating under threat had built into him. Marco. "It's set. All of it. Everything's ready." "I'll be down in 10, Victor said. He dressed, checked the arm, drank half a cup of coffee standing at the window of his suite, watching the estate grounds in early morning gray. The damage visible from here, the east wall, the gate structure that would need full replacement, the south wall where the engagement had run. His house, bearing the marks of a night it hadn't been built to survive and still standing. He thought about Castillo, who had been with the organization 12 years and who had a daughter in high school and who would not be going home to her. He thought about Farrell and the 40,000 and the sick mother and the weight of one bad decision made under financial pressure. He thought about none of these things in a way that slowed him down. He filed them in the place where everything that had to be carried got filed, and he went downstairs. Paramount. The dining room had been converted into an operational space. Marco had 6 of his most reliable people there. Not the largest deployment Victor could muster, but the 6 most precise, the ones he trusted with the specific kind of work that the next 12 hours required. Maps on the table. Photographs. A property layout that his intelligence people had built from public records and supplemented with information from sources he wasn't going to name in a room. Donati operated out of 3 primary locations. His residence on the far north side, a commercial property in the South Loop that functioned as the public face of his holdings, and a warehouse facility in Bridgeport that was the actual operational heart, where his people staged, where his decisions got made, where the information he'd bought from Farrell and Greco would have been received and analyzed. Victor wanted the warehouse, not because it was the most symbolically significant target or because destroying it would end Donati's operation. It wouldn't, not alone. But because the warehouse was where Leo Donati would be this morning, processing the failure of last night and determining his next move, and Victor had learned 30 years ago that the window between a man processing failure and a man constructing a response was the most useful window you'd ever get. "He'll have 12 to 15 people there on a regular morning," Marco said, moving along the table layout. "Add maybe 6 more given last night. He'll want coverage around him while he figures out what went wrong." 18 to 21, Victor said. "Roughly." Victor looked at the floor plan. "South entrance," he said. "East simultaneously. We don't announce, we go in fast and we go in complete. If Donati's in this back office," one of the men, a compact and precise individual named Torres, who had worked with Victor for 8 years, pointed to a section of the floor plan. "There are 2 exit points, one to the alley, one internal to the lower level. Block both before we go through the south entrance," Victor said. 30 seconds early." "It'll signal the move," Marco said. "Yes," Victor said. "We're past the point where not signaling matters." He looked around the table. "We're not negotiating today. We're not sending messages. We're ending the problem." The room was very quiet in the way rooms went quiet when 6 people who understood what a statement meant processed what they'd just agreed to. 10 o'clock, Victor said. We move at 10. Chloe found him in the study at 8:30. He was at the desk going through the last of the operational details when she knocked 3 times, the knock he'd told her to use, which she'd been using since, and came in with 2 cups of coffee, which was not something he'd asked for and was exactly right. She set one in front of him and took the other to the chair against the wall, which had become, over 7 months, her chair in this room. The place she sat when she came to the doorway, and he said, "Come in," the place where he'd grown accustomed to the specific quality of her presence, the way she occupied space without demanding it. She didn't ask about the documents on the desk. He drank the coffee. She drank hers. "Tommy called this morning," she said. 6:45. "How is he?" "Good." She paused, and the word sat there with everything it contained. "He sounded good." Another pause. "He wanted to know why there's a man outside his door." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the hospital upgraded their security protocols." She looked at her coffee cup. "He's 20 years old. He's not going to buy that for long." "He won't need to," Victor said. She looked up. "Today," he said. She understood him without elaboration. He watched her process it, what today meant, what the shape of it was, what happened on the other side of it either way. He watched her find the place in herself that held still in the presence of large, dangerous facts. "Okay," she said. "If something goes wrong, it's not going to," she said. "Chloe." "You told me it will," she said. "Flat out. Last night. No inflation." She looked at him with the steady, clear attention that had been the thing he'd noticed first about her 8 months ago. The quality of someone who saw without flinching. "So it will." He looked at her. He thought about Donati saying, "Is there something in that house you're trying to protect?" And he thought about himself saying, "If you touch her," with nothing managed in his voice, nothing strategic, just the raw underneath of 30 years of careful construction. He thought about what he was. "Chloe," he said. And then he stopped, because what came after the name was something he hadn't said to anyone in 11 years, and hadn't fully intended to say now, and was apparently going to say anyway, because the night had burned off everything that usually stood between intention and honesty. She waited. She was good at waiting. "When this is done," he said. Stopped again. "There are things He looked at the desk, the documents, the floor plan of a warehouse he was going to walk into in 90 minutes. "There are things that should be said, that I haven't said. I'm aware of that." She was very still. "When this is done," he said again. She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was doing the complicated thing he'd learned to read over months, the thing where she was feeling something substantial and deciding how much of it to bring into the open. "Okay," she said softly. Just that. No push, no pull. Just the word. Holding the promise of the conversation that was waiting on the other side of 10 o'clock. He nodded once. He picked up the documents and squared them on the desk. She got up and took the cups and went to the door. She stopped in the doorway without turning around. The same position she'd taken in the kitchen all those months ago, holding some feeling just at the threshold. Then she walked out. He sat for a moment in the silence she'd left. Then he picked up his phone and called Marco and said, "We leave at 9:45, and started going through the final details with the full, focused attention of a man who intended to come back. The drive to Bridgeport took 22 minutes. 2 vehicles, Victor and Marco and Torres in the first, 3 more in the second, following 60 seconds behind. The morning was overcast and the streets were doing their ordinary Chicago morning business, indifferent to the specific purpose of the 2 cars moving through them. Nobody talked. Victor sat in the front passenger seat and watched the city go past and breathed at a rate he kept deliberate, kept manageable. The arm was a contained pain. The side wound was a larger one that he was choosing not to acknowledge because acknowledging it would make it a variable, and it could not be a variable today. He'd taped it tightly before dressing, binding it against movement, and what he'd lost in mobility, he'd compensated for by planning around it. The warehouse was visible from 2 blocks out. A wide, low building with a gravel lot, indistinguishable from any of the other commercial buildings on the street except for the two men visible near the south entrance who were trying to look like they weren't standing guard and weren't succeeding. "Torres," Victor said. "Already on," Torres said. He had his phone to his ear, coordinating the block teams who were positioned at the alley exit and the lower-level door. 30 seconds. Victor checked his primary. Full. He checked the secondary. Full. He checked the time. 9:58. "We go on my word," he said. Nobody answered because nobody needed to. Torres's phone, a single word from the other end, confirming position. "Go," Victor said. The vehicle was moving before the word finished. They came in fast through the south entrance. The two men there reacted, but too slow, the kind of slow that happens when you've been standing in a gravel lot for 3 hours, and your attention has drifted from full readiness to managed vigilance, and Victor was through the door with Torres and Marco behind him before the situation outside had fully resolved itself. The warehouse interior was wide and dim, the industrial lighting harsh in patches and dark in between. Victor's eyes adjusted in the 3 seconds it took him to move from the door to the first cover point, a structural column 12 feet in, and he swept the space with the fast, practiced assessment of his peripheral vision. 12 people visible, more behind the internal partition at the far end. The noise that followed was not the organized violence of Donati's assault on the estate. It was faster and more chaotic. The chaos of people caught in a situation they'd been told to be ready for but were never truly ready for, and Victor moved through it with the cold efficiency of someone who had made peace with what this was before he walked in the door. He was halfway across the warehouse floor when he heard Donati's voice from behind the partition. "Hold." The word was quiet. Somehow it carried. Everything stopped. Victor stopped. The partition door opened. Leo Donati walked through it with two men behind him and stood in the middle of his warehouse and looked at Victor across 20 feet of concrete floor and the bodies of 3 of his men and the standoff positions of everyone else. Donati was 60, lean, silver-haired, wearing a suit at 10 in the morning because Donati always wore a suit. He had the face of a man who had built something large and slow and was comfortable in the patience that required. He looked at Victor with the calculating attention of someone doing a rapid assessment and not yet showing the result. "You came yourself," Donati said. "Yes," Victor said. "I told you I'd be in touch about arrangements." "The arrangements are done," Victor said. Donati looked at the warehouse around him, at the positions of Victor's people against the 6 of his own still standing. He did the math. "You've made your point," Donati said. "What do you want?" "You said last night that you had information," Victor said. "Farrell's information. Layouts, access points, schedules. The name of a woman who works in my house." He walked forward 3 steps slowly. "I want every copy of that information. I want every person you've shared it with identified. And I want your word. Not an arrangement, not a negotiated border. Your word that Bennett is outside this completely. Her name doesn't exist in your world." Donati looked at him. "That's not how—" "It is today," Victor said. Donati's jaw tightened. The 2 men behind him had shifted slightly, the small repositioning of people calculating intervention distances, and Torres had seen it. Victor caught Torres's movement in his peripheral vision, the adjustment of angle that meant he'd seen it too. "You're asking me to give you information, eliminate 3 of my distribution arrangements, and walk away from 11 months of positioning," Donati said. "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for the fact that you still have something left to walk away with," Victor said. The warehouse was very quiet. Someone was breathing too loud on the left side of the room. The overcast light through the high windows was flat and gray and indifferent. Donati looked at him for a long time. "The girl," he said finally. "The housekeeper." He said it with the specific precision of someone confirming they understand the exact weight of what is being traded. "She's genuinely that important to you." Victor said nothing. Donati let out a long breath. "You know what you've done," he said, "by showing me that. You know what you've handed me." "I've handed you nothing," Victor said. "I've shown you the line. There's a difference." "The line meaning—" The line meaning if her name appears in any context connected to you or anyone associated with you, every resource I have redirects to a single purpose. He held Donati's eyes. I have considerable resources. The silence extended. Then Donati turned to the man on his right and said something low, and the man went back through the partition door. He was gone for 40 seconds. When he came back, he was carrying a laptop and a folder. The digital files and the hard copies, Donati said. He set them on the nearest flat surface, a work table along the wall. Everything Farrell gave us. Victor didn't move toward them. He looked at Donati. Torres, he said. Torres crossed to the table, opened the laptop, checked it, opened the folder. He looked at Victor and gave a single nod. Your word, Victor said. Donati looked at him for a long, final moment. Something moved through his face. Not anger exactly, not concession exactly. Something more like the expression of a man who has looked at a problem from every angle and found that the angles have run out. Bennett, Donati said. She doesn't exist in my world. Say it completely, Victor said. Donati's jaw tightened. Then, Chloe Bennett and her brother are outside this. My word. Victor looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he looked at Marco. Marco gave the signal. His people began withdrawing toward the south entrance in the organized backward motion of a deployment that was concluding on its own terms. Torres took the laptop and the folder. Victor kept his eyes on Donati until the last moment. He was 2 steps from the south door when Donati said, Victor? Victor stopped, didn't turn. You built something untouchable, Donati said. 11 years, nothing got through it. A pause. Then you let a girl with a sick brother clean your floors. Victor said nothing. I'm not saying it as a threat, Donati said. I'm saying it as an observation, from one man who understands what it costs to build something that solid to another. Another pause. She must be something. Victor pushed the door open and walked out into the gray Chicago morning and did not answer, because the answer was not something he was going to give Leo Donati. And also because it was something he was still in the process of understanding himself. The full shape of it, the weight, the way it had restructured everything he'd thought he knew about what he was capable of losing and what he was capable of choosing. He got in the car. Marco got in. Torres got in. The car pulled out of the gravel lot. Done? Marco said. Done, Victor said. They drove. Victor looked at the city going past and thought about 10 o'clock and a woman in the study with 2 cups of coffee who had said okay in the specific way she said things. Not as surrender, not as performance, but as the sound of someone choosing to trust the thing directly in front of them. He thought about when this is done there are things that should be said, and the way she had held that sentence open like a door. He pulled out his phone. He called the estate. Marta picked up. Mr. Russo? Is she there? He said. In the library, Marta said. She's been in the library since you left. He thought about her in the library, surrounded by the supplies she'd organized and the chair she'd sat in after the shot, sitting with everything the night had put in her, and waiting. Tell her I'm coming back, he said. Marta said she would. He put the phone in his pocket and sat back and felt the arm and the side and the accumulated damage of a week that had moved through him like weather. And underneath all of it, underneath the exhaustion and the cost and the arithmetic of what the morning had required, he felt something that he had no clean word for. Something that resided in the chest, specific and warm and slightly terrifying. The precise sensation of a man who has walked back through the door of his own life and found that someone left a light on. He closed his eyes for the rest of the drive. The city moved past him, and the morning held, gray and cold, and entirely indifferent, and in 40 minutes he was going to walk back into his house, and there would be a conversation that he had been avoiding for 7 months. And he was going to stop avoiding it, because Leo Donati had given him one thing without meaning to. The understanding that the only thing more dangerous than letting someone matter was pretending, past the point of reason, that they didn't. Marco pulled through the estate gate, the temporary structure his people had installed at 4 a.m., functional if not elegant, and the house came into view through the windshield, and Victor opened his eyes and looked at it, and it looked different from every other time he had come back to it in 11 years, Different in a way he couldn't have precisely named but felt with complete clarity, as though somewhere in the night the building had stopped being a fortress and started being something else entirely. Something that required a different word, a simpler one, a word he had not used in connection with this place or himself or anything in his life for longer than he could accurately calculate. He got out of the car. He walked toward the front door, and behind him Marco said something quiet to Torres, and the morning was cold and still, and the door was right there. And on the other side of it was the conversation he had promised, and the woman he had promised it to, and Victor Russo, who had survived 30 years of a life that had killed better men, walked through the door and into whatever came next. She heard the car on the gravel. She'd been in the library for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She knew that the way she knew most things she didn't want to know, not by checking the time, but by the way the light through the high windows had shifted, the morning gray deepening fractionally toward something still gray but different, the quality of overcast that meant noon was closer than dawn. She'd been sitting in the leather chair with an anatomy textbook open on her lap that she hadn't read a word of, and she'd been listening to the estate settle and breathe around her, the sounds of Marta moving in the kitchen, the low radio communication of the men posted at the temporary gate, the particular quality of a house that was waiting for something to resolve. When Marta knocked and opened the door and said Mr. Russo called, "He's coming back?" Chloe nodded once and said thank you, and Marta looked at her for a moment with the specific expression of a woman who had been in this house for 12 years and knew the weight of what certain pieces of information carried, and then Marta left. Chloe closed the textbook. She sat for another 10 minutes. Then she heard the car. She didn't go to the window. She didn't move from the chair. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her spine straight, and her breathing steady, and let the sounds of arrival filter through the house. The car door, voices outside, the front door, footsteps in the main hall. She tracked them without seeing them, the way you track things you've memorized. His footsteps stopped outside the library door. He knocked 3 times. "Come in," she said. "What?" He looked like the far side of something. That was the only way she could frame it to herself. He looked like a man who had gone through a thing and come out the other side of it and was still in the process of understanding what he'd crossed. The suit was the same one he'd left in, rumpled now at the sleeves, and carrying the evidence of a morning she hadn't seen. The arm she'd bandaged was held slightly differently than his right, a small, managed compensation that he probably didn't know he was making. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there when he left, shallow and already closing, and his face had the compressed quality of someone running on very little sleep and a great deal of will. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked back. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "Marta told me." She paused. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing new," he said. "That's not the same as no." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He came into the library and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood near the reading table with his hands at his sides and looked at her in the chair, and the room was quiet in the way it had been quiet that first night in the kitchen. Not empty quiet, not the absence of sound, but the specific quality of silence that exists between two people who have run out of reasons to avoid what's in the middle of the room. "You said there were things that should be said," Chloe said. "Yes," he said. "Then say them," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him find the place in himself where the words were, and watched him decide to reach for them instead of managing them, and something in his face shifted with the effort of that decision. Not softened exactly, but opened slightly, the way a fist opens when it has decided to let something go. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's not—" He stopped. "I mean, specifically. I know how to do most things. I've been operating in situations that would end other men for 30 years, and I know how to operate." He looked at the bookcase behind her, then back at her. "I don't know how to stand in a room and tell someone what they mean to me. I stopped knowing how to do that a long time ago, and I have no evidence I was particularly good at it before that." She said nothing. She let the silence hold. "You came here to clean floors," he said. "You had a fever and nowhere to put it, and you fell asleep in my bed because your body made a decision your will was too exhausted to override." He paused. "I should have had you removed." "Why didn't you?" she said. He looked at her. "Because you were sick," he said. And you were... He stopped again, pressed his mouth together for a moment. You looked like someone who hadn't been allowed to rest in a very long time. And I couldn't... He stopped for the third time, and this one was different from the others. This one was not about finding words. This one was about something the words were going to cost him. I couldn't make myself be the next thing that denied you that. The library was very quiet. Victor, she said. I know what I am, he said. I want to be clear that I know exactly what I am. I've done things that can't be undone. I've made choices that I made deliberately and with full understanding of what they required. And I don't stand here asking you to minimize them or reinterpret them. I'm not a different person from the one who runs this organization. I never will be. I know that, she said. Then you know that what I'm offering you is not... He exhaled slowly. It's not simple. It's not clean. It's not the kind of life where the worst thing that happens to you is a difficult conversation. What happened this week? That's not extraordinary. That's the shape of this. She stood up from the chair. He went still when she stood, a small, involuntary stillness, the response of someone braced for a decision they're not certain of. She crossed the room toward him. Not fast, deliberately, step by step, the way she moved when she knew what she was doing and had decided to do it fully. She stopped 2 feet from him and looked up at his face, the cut above the eyebrow and the exhaustion and the thing in his eyes that was not going to be described cleanly, but was real and was looking directly at her. Before I came here, she said, I was working 3 jobs and watching my brother die, and living in an apartment where the heat went out in February, and I fixed it by putting tape over the window gap. She held his gaze. My life before you was not safe. It was not peaceful. The only difference was that the things threatening me were slower and quieter. She paused. You want me to understand that your world is dangerous. I understand that. What I'm telling you is that the world I came from was already dangerous. It was just dangerous without you in it. He looked at her. Something moved through his face. Chloe, he said. The only time I have felt safe, she said, is in this house. With you. She said it flat. The way she said things, she meant absolutely. No inflation, no apology. That's the truth? I'm not asking you to make it something you're comfortable with. I'm telling you because you said there were things that should be said, and I agree. He reached out. His hand came up slowly, the right hand, and he put it against the side of her face with the careful deliberateness of a man who has not touched someone tenderly in a very long time and is relearning the weight of it. His palm was warm. His thumb moved once along her cheekbone. Not a gesture, not a performance, just a thing that happened because his hand was there and she was there, and there was nothing between them anymore that required management. She put her hand over his. They stood in the library in the flat gray morning light, and the silence was the warmest silence she had ever been inside, and she felt the specific and complete sensation of something arriving. Not happiness exactly, not relief exactly, but the thing that lives underneath both of those. The foundational thing, the thing that only exists when you stop waiting for it to be taken away. He leaned his forehead against hers. She felt him exhale. A long, full breath, the kind that comes from very deep and carries something with it when it goes, like a man setting down something he's been holding upright through sheer stubbornness for years. They stood like that for a while. I'm going to need a doctor, he said finally, against her hair. For the arm. I've been telling you that for 4 days, she said. I know, he said. Victor. What? Don't make me tell you things 4 times, she said. Something changed in him. She felt it before she heard it, the quality of his breathing shifting, and then he made a sound she hadn't heard from him before, low and brief and entirely real. Not quite a laugh. Something softer. Something that had been sealed off for a long time, opening slightly. Okay, he said. The doctor came that afternoon. He was a precise, gray-haired man named Ellison, who worked with the organization on medical matters and who examined both wounds with the professional lack of reaction of someone who had examined similar things before. He rebandaged the arm, looked at the side wound with an expression that suggested it had been more serious than either Victor or Chloe had been acknowledging, and stated flatly that Victor needed to be horizontal for 24 hours minimum. Victor said he understood. Chloe said, "He'll do it?" which was a different kind of statement, and Ellison looked at her and then at Victor with the specific expression of a man recalibrating a situation, and then he packed his bag and left without further comment. Victor, for the record, spent 18 of the required 24 hours horizontal. Chloe considered this close enough. Marco came on the second day. He sat across from Victor in the study, Victor on the couch because Ellison's orders were still technically in effect, which was a compromise they'd arrived at, and went through the aftermath with the methodical efficiency of a man who'd been handling aftermaths for 14 years. The warehouse operation had been clean. 2 of Donati's people had required medical attention. The rest had been in a position to walk away, which was the designed outcome. Donati's word had held through 72 hours, which was early but consistent. No movement, no communication through any of the channels they were monitoring, no signal that the agreement was being violated. "He'll hold," Marco said. He ran the math. "I know," Victor said. "He lost 12 men in the estate assault and 3 more in the warehouse," Marco said. "And he got nothing for it. He's smart enough to know when he's overextended." Victor said nothing for a moment. Then, "Castillo's family." "I've handled it," Marco said. "The same way as always." "The same way isn't enough for 12 years, Victor said. Marco looked at him. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He paused. "I'll do better." "We'll do better," Victor said. Marco accepted that with a nod. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the middle distance in the way he did when he was carrying something he was deciding whether to put down. "She stayed," Marco said. Victor looked at him. "Last night I asked Marta," Marco said, "if the girl had gone home. Marta said she was in the east sitting room, reading." A pause. "I thought she would go, after all of it." "She didn't," Victor said. "No," Marco said. He looked at Victor with the complete attention of a man who had known him for 32 years. "Good," he said. "Just that." And then he picked up his coat and left. Victor sat on the couch in the study and looked at the door Marco had pulled closed behind him and felt the words settle in the room. Good. 14 years of professional partnership and 32 years of knowing each other, and Marco Vitali's approval had never once been stated as anything other than the absence of disapproval. He had never, in all of that time, heard Marco say good in that specific tone, attached to that specific subject. He understood what it meant. He sat with it. On the third day, Chloe called her brother. Victor wasn't in the room, but the house was quiet enough that he heard her voice in the hallway when he was coming down the stairs. Not the words, just the quality of it. Different from the voice she used for everything in this house. Lighter. The particular frequency of someone's voice, when the person they're talking to is someone they've been keeping alive through sheer force of will and can now, for the first time in a long time, simply talk to. He stopped on the stairs and listened to that frequency without being able to distinguish words, and then he went back up and gave her the time. She found him in the study 20 minutes later. "He's doing well," she said. "The physical therapist says he's ahead of schedule." "Good," Victor said. She came in and sat in her chair. She had her reading glasses on and a notebook in her hand, and she set them both on the side table and looked at him with the direct, unmanaged attention that she'd been giving him for 3 days now, since the library, since the thing that had been said and the thing that had been wordless. "He wants to meet you," she said. Victor looked at her. "Tommy," she said. "He knows your name. He's known your name. He figured it out about 3 months in, that it was you. He's not stupid." A pause. "He wants to thank you." Victor was quiet for a moment. "You told him not to," he said. It wasn't a question. He could hear it in the way she'd framed the sentence. "I told him it wasn't necessary," she said. "He disagreed." She paused. "He said the man who paid for his life deserves at least a conversation." "He's 20, Victor said. "He's also right," she said. Victor looked at the window. The estate grounds were visible from here. The repaired gate, the south wall where the damage had been patched, the east section where the hedge line had been replanted. His house, carrying the evidence of what it had survived, standing. "Bring him to dinner," Victor said, "when he's strong enough." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the notebook and opened it to a page she'd been working on and said, "Marta wants to know about the East Garden wall. Whether you want it rebuilt the same way or modified." "Same way," he said. "She thought you'd say that," Chloe said. "Then why did she ask?" "Because she wanted to hear you say it," Chloe said. "She said it means you're planning to stay." Victor looked at her. She was looking at the notebook. There was a very small curve at the corner of her mouth that she wasn't managing, or had chosen not to manage, which was, he had learned, a different thing. "Tell her same way," he said. But on the fourth day he found the contract. He hadn't gone looking for it. It surfaced when he was going through the locked drawer for the routing document, which he was finally ready to destroy because the chain of events it had initiated was fully resolved and keeping it served no purpose. The contract was in a folder he'd placed there 8 months ago, the day after it was signed, and he'd put it there and not opened the drawer again. He took it out. He read through it. 3 pages. His attorney's language, the language of a man who understood that the document's function was to make permanent something that had begun as emergency and desperation. 5 years of exclusive service. Specific terms. His signature and hers, side by side at the bottom of the 3rd page. Her signature was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who took small, precise things seriously. He sat with it for a while. Then he went downstairs to the kitchen, where Chloe was going through the week's household management with Marta, the two of them at the kitchen island with a notebook and a phone, and the particular efficient shorthand of 2 women who had worked out a functional system and were running it smoothly. They both looked up when he came in. He set the contract on the counter in front of Chloe. She looked at it, then at him. Marta found somewhere else to be. Chloe picked up the contract and held it in both hands and looked at him with the question she wasn't asking aloud because she wanted to hear him say it. "It's yours," he said. "Do what you want with it." She looked at it for a moment. Then she carried it to the stove, turned on the burner, and held the corner of the document over the flame. It caught at the edge and took slowly, the way thick paper takes, and she held it until she had to drop it into the sink and then watched it finish there, the paper curling and blackening and the last of the specific language of desperation and emergency turning to ash and going gray. She turned off the water. She turned around. "The debt," she said. "Gone," he said. "The 5 years." "Done," he said. "Starting now, you're here because you choose to be." She looked at him across the kitchen. The morning light was better today, some actual sun coming through for the first time in days, hitting the counter and the floor and the place where she stood. "And Tommy's medical costs going forward," she said. He'd been waiting for this one. "I've established a trust," he said. 2 million. Managed independently. His name only. Accessible for medical costs and anything else he needs. It runs regardless of anything that happens to me, to you, to this house. She went very still. "It's done," he said, as of yesterday morning. He watched her process it, the full shape of it, what it meant, what it guaranteed for a 20-year-old who had spent 14 months on dialysis and had just gotten the chance at something like a future. He watched her find the bottom of it, and he watched what happened in her face when she got there. Not a collapse, not a flood of feeling, but something deeper and less performed. A specific stillness that came from a very deep place of relief. The stillness of a person who has been holding a thing up for so long that when it's finally taken from them, they don't know for a moment what to do with their hands. She pressed her lips together once. Her eyes were bright. "Victor," she said. "Don't thank me for it," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "You've said that before." A pause. "I wasn't going to thank you." "What were you going to say?" She crossed the kitchen toward him the same way she'd crossed the library, deliberate, step by step, choosing each one. She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face, and she had the reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she was 24 years old, and she had a life that had already asked more of her than most lives ask. And she was standing in his kitchen in the morning sunlight looking at him like he was something solid. I was going to say that you're a better man than you think you are, she said, and that you've been one this whole time. You just needed someone around long enough to see it. He looked at her. That's a generous interpretation, he said. It's an accurate one, she said. There's a difference. He put his hand against the side of her face again, the same way he had in the library, with the same careful deliberateness, and she turned her cheek slightly into his palm the way she had then, and the kitchen was warm and the sun was coming through, and somewhere above them the house existed around them, all 7,000 square feet of it, with its repaired walls and its restocked library and its east garden that was going to be rebuilt the same way, because the man who owned it intended to stay. Stay, he said. Not a request, not a command. Something that lived between those things in a register he hadn't used before. Not for the contract. Not because of what you owe me. He paused. Stay because this is where you want to be. She held his gaze. She didn't look away and she didn't manage her face, and what was there was clear and complete and unambiguous. I burned the contract, she said, so you know I don't have to be anywhere. She put her hand over his again, the same gesture, warm and certain. I'm here because it's where I want to be. He nodded. Just once. The nod of a man receiving something he had stopped believing was available. Wow. Tommy came to dinner 3 weeks later. He was thin still, the specific thinness of someone in active recovery, the body redistributing resources toward healing. But he moved on his own, without the walker he'd needed for the first 2 weeks post-surgery. And when he came through the front door of the estate, his eyes went immediately up to the ceiling height and then across the room to the staircase and then to the artwork on the west wall, moving with the instinctive visual appetite of someone who had been in small spaces and sick rooms for a long time and was recalibrating to scale. He was tall. He had Chloe's eyes. The same direct quality, the same tendency to go fully still when he was processing something, and he was wearing a button shirt he'd clearly ironed carefully, and he shook Victor's hand with a grip that was firm without performing firmness. Mr. Russo, he said. Victor? Victor said. Tommy looked at him, then at Chloe, who was standing slightly behind Victor's right shoulder, and something passed between the siblings that was wordless and complete. The specific communication of two people who had kept each other alive through a long stretch of hard time and knew the territory of each other's faces without needing to narrate it. Tommy looked back at Victor. Victor, he said. Okay. They ate in the dining room, which Marta had set carefully without being asked to set it carefully. The food was good. Actual food. The kind of meal that had been thought about rather than assembled. And Marta had done this also without being asked, because Marta had been running this household for 12 years, and understood what a dinner meant when Victor sat at the head of the table, and Chloe sat to his right, and there was a young man across from her who had her eyes, and had come here to say something. Tommy said it at the end of the meal, over coffee, when the table had the particular quality of a shared meal's ending. The warmth and the slight relaxation and the way people settle into themselves after being fed. I need to say something, Tommy said. Tommy, Chloe said. No, Chloe, I do. He looked at Victor. I know what my sister gave up. I know what she agreed to. 5 years, and she didn't tell me until after the surgery. And when she told me, He stopped. His jaw worked once. I know it was for me. And I know that what you did, the money, the surgery, I know that came with conditions. And I know Chloe paid them. And I need you to know that I understand what that cost her. Victor said nothing. I'm not here to judge what you are, Tommy said. That's not my business. What's my business is my sister. And what I need to know is... He paused. Not from emotion, but from precision, choosing the words. What is she to you, now, after everything? The dining room was quiet. Chloe had gone very still beside Victor. He could feel her, the specific quality of her stillness, not afraid, braced, the brace of someone who has decided to let something happen and is holding themselves open to the outcome. Victor looked at Tommy Bennett across the table and thought about a routing document and a warehouse and a phone call at 1 a.m, and a woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head standing in his kitchen in the sunlight. She's the reason I came home, Victor said. Tommy looked at him. She's the reason I came home every time, Victor said. This week and before this week. He held the younger man's gaze. She doesn't belong to this house, or to me, or to an arrangement. But she stays because she chooses to stay, and I'll spend whatever time she gives me making sure she doesn't regret that choice. The dining room was quiet for a long moment. Tommy looked at his sister. Something moved through his face, young and real and complicated, and then he looked back at Victor and nodded once, with the particular weight of someone who is not fully satisfied but is choosing to accept, for now, the evidence in front of him. "Okay," Tommy said. Chloe let out a breath. Marta appeared from the kitchen with a plate she'd been keeping warm and set it on the table without comment, and went back, and the tension in the room shifted into something else. Not dissolved exactly, but redistributed into something more ordinary, more livable. Tommy picked up his fork. "This is good," he said about the food. "Marta," Victor said. "Everything in this house that's good is Marta." From the kitchen, without appearing in the doorway. Finally, he says it out loud. Chloe laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded. The laugh Victor had heard twice before and had found, both times, to be the most startling sound in the house. Tommy grinned at his sister and she shook her head at him. And the dining room breathed out, and the evening continued from there, in the way that ordinary evenings continue. The conversation finding smaller things to carry, the food getting eaten, the coffee going cold, and getting refilled. Later, after Tommy had gone, Marco's man had driven him, with the particular careful attention that Marco had applied to everyone connected to Chloe since the night Donati said her name, and Tommy had accepted this without comment, which suggested he was smarter than 20 years old required him to be. Victor found her on the back terrace. She was standing at the railing looking at the grounds in the dark. The east garden was a shadow from here, the new work not yet visible in the low light, but the shape of it was there. The same shape it had always been, rebuilt from the same plans, permanent in the way that deliberate choices about what to keep are permanent. He stood beside her. She didn't look at him. She was watching the dark garden with the particular expression she wore when she was somewhere quiet inside herself, past the day's surface. "He likes you," she said. "He's not sure about me," Victor said. "That's different from not liking you," she said. "Tommy doesn't trust easily. Neither do I." She paused. "He's deciding. Give him time." "I have time," Victor said. She turned to look at him at that. The terrace light was low and behind them, and her face was half in shadow and half in the weak glow, and her eyes were doing the clear, direct thing they did when she had decided to say something true. "This is going to be hard," she said. "What we're doing. I'm not pretending it isn't." "I know," he said. "There are going to be nights like this week. There are going to be things I find out that I'll have to decide what to do with." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I told you that already." "You did," he said. "But I'm also not going to be managed," she said, "or protected from information the way you protect other people. If something happens, I want to know. If something is going to affect me or Tommy, I want to know first." She paused. "That's the condition. The only one." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. And then, "That's all I needed." She turned back to the garden. He stood beside her and looked at the dark shape of the east garden and thought about the length of time that had passed between the night she'd fallen asleep in his bed and this terrace, this night, this woman standing close enough that her shoulder was 3 inches from his arm, and the space between them had the quality of something chosen rather than something accidental. He put his arm around her. She leaned into it, not with surprise, not as a performance, just a simple movement toward warmth, the natural physical response of a person who has decided to trust the body beside them. They stood on the terrace, and the city existed somewhere beyond the grounds, enormous and indifferent and full of the ordinary violence of ordinary life. And inside the house, Marta was doing the last of the kitchen, and the security men were rotating at the gate, and Tommy Bennett was in a car heading back to a hospital room he'd be leaving for the last time in 6 days, going home to the apartment his sister was about to be able to actually afford, going home to the future that had been purchased with a contract that was now ash in a kitchen sink. None of it was resolved in the clean sense. Victor knew that. The organization still existed and would continue to require the things it required. Donati's word held, but words were only as good as the calculations behind them, and calculations changed when circumstances changed. There were men who had died this week whose families were going to feel the absence for the rest of their lives. There were decisions he had made over 30 years that did not become undecisions because he was standing on a terrace with a woman who had told him he was better than he thought he was. He knew all of that. He also knew this. The house behind him had a light on in the east sitting room, where Chloe's books and her reading glasses and her notebooks had been for 8 months, and that light was on because she had left it on when she came outside, and she had left it on because she was coming back in, and that small and ordinary fact, the unremarkable domestic human fact of a light left on because someone intended to return to the room that held their things, was something he had not had in this house or in himself for more than 11 years. He didn't know what to call what he was feeling. He didn't need to. She shifted slightly against his side, not leaving, just adjusting, settling more firmly into the warmth of the arm around her, and he held on, and the night held its ordinary dark around them, and the east garden waited in its reconstructed shape for morning, and the house was warm behind them with the life that had taken up residence inside its walls over 8 months of quiet and crisis, and the slow, irresistible accumulation of 2 people finding the other one necessary. "Come inside," she said eventually. "Yes," he said. They went in. He pulled the terrace door closed behind them, and she reached past him to flip the latch out of habit, the automatic gesture of someone who had learned the specific lock of this specific door because she lived here, and he watched her hand on the latch and thought that this was the smallest and most complete thing he had seen in a long time. She moved into the hallway. He followed her. The house received them the way it had received everything this year. Steadily, without drama, already adapted to the new weight it was being asked to hold.